back to chiaroscuro.
Yeah. Well, chiaroscuro was sort of this, as I said, a carbuncle on the butt of this enormous estate, and I was called over for a meeting, and it was really very cute in that I'm set down in this boardroom and things, and here is the executor of Sherman's estate and other fancy people, and they said, "Well, Hank, we've got to figure out what we're going to do about this little company, this chiaroscuro." And he said that it was formed after the last will had been written. There are no provisions for it whatsoever, and we have to make certain, because of the size and scope of the estate and so forth and that kind of thing, that everything is handled just perfectly. I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And he says, we know what Sherman would want to have done, but it's not codified anywhere. It's not written down. And so what we have decided is that if it's okay with you, we will transfer all the stock in chiaroscuro to you and all the assets and so forth. But you have to, in return, pay back the estate Mr. Fairchild's investment. And I go gulp, because I'm thinking, oh no, I know what has gone into this, all the pressing cost and the musician's cost and things. And I was a guy who was, working for the CIA. I had no outside income of any kind. And so I said, well, how much does that amount to? And they said, well, Mr. Fairchild's initial investment in the company was $500, and we think that will be sufficient. And I went, oh. So all the stuff was transferred to me for $500, which was still a struggle to come up with that. But not only did I get the masters and this and that and the other, but I got the bank account, which was at the Bank of New York, and that was Sherman's primary bank. Now, he did not have an ordinary account. Private bankers and this and that and the other. I still have that account. And the Bank of New York ultimately was bought by Chase, but if I go in to make a deposit or something at Chase now, they look at me because the number, the bank number, is only 6 numbers long, and if you get a checking account at Chase now, it's about this long. And so I still have that old account, but it meant that I had a private banker who would save my butt, and did all the time, because I had this funny account. And I'd hate to think how many times Dorothy, the private banker, really made things possible that otherwise couldn't have been, because I just was overdrawn or underdrawn or whatever. But anyhow, wound up with the company, and because we were missing a number, and I always wanted to have the numbers be right, Marion had taken back her record called Ambience. That was Halcyon number 103. Earl was number 1, Henderson was number 2. So I had the Earl record and the Henderson record repressed. Still had a lot of jackets, so I had little stickers that said chiaroscuro that I would put on top of where it said Halcyon, because I certainly wasn't going to make new jackets. And John Hammond had had a heart attack. He had heart attacks like you and I have colds. But I went to see John up at Lenox Hill, and I said, John, if you could record anybody you wanted to right now, who would you record? And he said, you got to do Mary Lou Williams. So I said, okay. So I found a way to do Mary Lou Williams, and she became number 103. And that was good. And Bobby Hackett, Willie the Lion, was redone as 104. Bobby Hackett became number 5. Don Yule became number 6. And on. We just kept doing. I forget the first one, mostly all solo piano players. I couldn't afford anything. I mean, Bobby Hackett was a stretch. I mean, that. But there were records with Dick Wellstud and Dill Jones, and then finally, we did the one Eddie Condon that was based on the town hall concerts, working with Ed, putting that thing together. Paid everybody who was alive. I guess the rules really were you had to pay everybody and track down estates. I didn't even know about that. I just tracked down people who were still alive on the date and gave them session fees. And ultimately, one thing led to another, and made a Ruby Braff date that had 5 people in it, or maybe 6. It had Sammy Margulies and Dottie Dodgen, and Howie Collins, and Ruby and Hyman and Milt. George Avakian was responsible for putting me with Ruby Braff. He says, Hank, you should do something with Ruby Braff. Nobody's made a record with him in 100 years. And I said, great, I don't know Ruby. He says, well, I'll introduce you. And we met in some saloon uptown. And Ruby was wonderful. He really wanted to do something. He came down and made a really great record that had a really stinky record cover on it. And he liked it so much, he says, I want to make another one right away. And I says, Ruby, I don't have any money. I can't afford 5 or 6 people. No, let's get Ellis Larkins, only 2 people. And I says, okay, I'll see what I can do. So we did the record with Ruby and Ellis just playing pretty tunes. It had a stinky cover too. And in a minute or two, we made the first Dave McKenna. I really wanted to do Dave because Dave hadn't made a solo record since the late 50s or early 60s or something like that. Oh, and in the meantime, there was a Teddy Wilson. Teddy Wilson was the first one we made at the recording studio on Christopher Street. I had gone down to see Teddy at the cookery where he was holding forth, and asked him if he wanted to do something for a little bitty, tiny, unknown label. And he said sure, because nobody was asking him. That was the point. At this, I mean, the older, mostly black, mainstream guys, nobody gave a damn about. I mean, Teddy hadn't made a record. When I did that solo record with Teddy in 72, he hadn't made a record in the United States that was a solo since probably the last, I think he did a Columbia trio or something in the early 60s or something. Nobody cared about these guys. And that was the whole point of Chiaroscuro, kind of, getting these wonderful mainstream performers who were A-plus people that no one cared about. And I remember on Teddy, it was so primitive. I hadn't finished the studio yet, but he was available, and the piano was in good shape. I had found the piano that's still sitting right over there, a 1927 Steinway D that was in beautiful condition and totally rebuilt. And Teddy wanted to do it, and I said, well, Teddy, we're going to have to be very careful because I had only built the studio to the point that I had a control room, but I didn't have a window with glass in it. I just had a big hole in the wall. I said, so you have to, and but he was wonderful, and on that date, he set what was then and continued to be till the end of Downtown Sound the studio record for the most takes of one song. He did 24 takes of what a Little Moonlight can do. He was just a perfectionist, and he played and played and played and played and played, and finally got one that he liked. And I mean, I'm not sufficiently smart that I could tell which was, that much different. But we did that in 2 days, and it was in June, and it was really hot, and we had no anything. I remember there's a photograph of Teddy at the piano, and he's wearing just a T-shirt or something, and but it went well. And what we had him do, I had John Hammond. The idea was to have Teddy do solos of the favorite songs that he had done with Billy, and the record was called With Billy in Mind. And we did 20 songs, and could only use 12 of them, or maybe we did 18 songs and could only use 12. But in any event, when we got around to doing the CDs, we took the alternates and made the whole, not the alternates, the extra songs, and put the entire session out on a CD. That's one real advantage of CDs. You could cram so much more music into them. But that one worked out pretty well. The McKENNA was even more fun. That was a year or so later, because Dave was really reluctant to record. He always was reluctant to record. I don't know any tunes, that kind of attitude. And so, like Earl, he was staying at the Wellington Hotel, and he had done, I don't know whether he was in a band or playing solo, but he was at Michael's Pub and had been playing. And I kept nagging him to do something. No, I don't know any tunes. He closed on a Saturday night. I went up to the Wellington Hotel and banged on his door on Sunday morning late, like 11 or something. And he came to the door and I says, Dave, there are $500 bills sitting on the keys of my piano on Christopher Street. If you would like them, come on down. And he said, okay. And did. And he made the first of all the series of things that we did with Dave. And it was just a spectacularly good record. I remember Larry Cohn, who was the head of pop stuff at Epic at that time, but he was also a jazz and blues fan. He said, this is the best record, the best piano record anybody's made this year. That's pretty good. It got 5 stars as well, and a really good Leo Meyersdorf cover. And it just sort of went from there. Finally, I got enough money together to occasionally do a date with, arrangements. The first one that was a date that had arrangements was the Buddy Tate. Buddy Tate had come in, and I really liked Buddy. Nice man. And he was making a project for Albert McCarthy. And he had also been on John Jeremy's movie, Born to Swing. So I'd gotten to know him a little bit. And I said, Buddy, we've got to make a record. And so we put together a list of who we wanted to be on the record, which was Buddy, and he wanted to have Illinois, and he wanted to have Roy, and he wanted to have Dickie Wells, and he wanted to have Mary Lou, and he wanted to have Stevie Jordan and Gus, and and he wanted an arrangement by Buck Clayton, and he wanted an arrangement by Mary Lou. So I actually had to pay for an arrangement with Buck and an arrangement with Mary Lou, and Buddy wrote a couple himself. And this was up to this point, almost all of the records had gone very smoothly without any incidents or anything like that. But on this one, which was one of the early multi-tracks that we did at Downtown Sound, or it was still Warp Studios at that time, it came Downtown Sound. One of the musicians messed up. Dickie Wells was drunk. And you could really hear it on the stuff. It was just a mess. And I called Buddy aside and I said, Buddy, this isn't going to work because Dickie is drunk. And he says, yeah, I know. And I says, Buddy, I'm just a kid. I can't send Dickie Wells home. And he says, I'll take care of it. Because I couldn't. I didn't know what to do. And so anyway, the record turned out pretty well. And it was fun because, for a lot of reasons, but Helen Oakley wrote the notes, Stanley Dance's wife. And she's sort of forgotten now, but she was really important and a wonderful writer. And so that was sort of that was my first really kind of big, more than a trio or a quartet or a piano solo kind of production. The next record after that was a Wild Bill Davison thing that we did live at the Rainbow Grill. And it had 6 or 7 pieces, but that didn't feature arrangements or anything. That was just Wild Bill and his band, which it was funny. That was the first one that I ever had that had technical problems of a different sort. The Willie the Lion with the acoustically out of phase was one thing, but what I didn't realize on the Rainbow Grill record was that I set up all the remote equipment in back of the bandstand, about half a story higher. You could look down on the band and I got levels and everything. I had my little mixers and stuff. And in those days, I mean, I got to do some of the recording myself, the remote stuff, and it was fun. But I remember sitting with everything, doing a live to 2-track mix, and with a little mixer that was probably a 6-in, 2-out mixer. And I'm listening on my headphones, and I said, what's that noise? And what was happening, I was so high up that I was getting radio signals and interference in my headphones, and I was sure that it was going onto the tape as well. We finally solved it and figured it out and made a pretty good record. The only thing that was wrong was that the band was supposed to be Wild Bill and Vic and Kenny DeVerne and Claude Hopkins and Cliff Lehman, and I think I forget who the bass player was, I'd have to look it up. But what happened, Kenny got messed up somehow, and so he was replaced with Jerry Fuller, and Vic got messed up and he was replaced by Eddie Hubble, and halfway through Cliff Lehman got sick and was replaced by Dottie Dodgen, and then Claude could only make some of the dates, and so on some of them he was replaced by Till Jones. So the only constants were Wild Bill almost, but it came out okay. And your friend Red Balaban wrote the liner notes for that one, and then things just went from there. And we continued to make records all the way up through the highest number was 2002, I think. There were 3 numbers that were not used because the projects fell through, or number 190 7 or something like that. Didn't work out. And yes,